We now move on to leaders' questions, and I call on Deputy Micheál Martin.
Taoiseach, over 300,000 families across the country are still being screwed by the banks in relation to the standard variable rate mortgages. These are families that have benefited least from the current low interest rate environment across Europe. Their mortgages, their rates have steadily increased, while others have fallen. And the response has been totally inadequate. And we're talking about very substantial amounts of money here for the families concerned. Someone on a 200,000 mortgage, 20-year mortgage, is paying over €992 more than somebody starting a new mortgage, or nearly 4,000 more than someone on an average European mortgage. And it's unacceptable. And they've borne the brunt for far too long. And you yourself, Taoiseach, said last April that from any moral point of view, from any ethical point of view, when banks are now restructured and on their way to making profit again, it is just not acceptable that when they themselves can borrow at much cheaper rates, that they continue to have higher rates applied to mortgage holders. But nothing has happened since then, Taoiseach. You said last week, we have a budget coming up in October. There are opportunities for the Minister to deal with the banks if that's the case and if that is necessary. And last evening, again, your Minister representing the government, first of all, Michael Noonan from Brussels, saying the banks have moved. He had the incredible nerve to suggest that the banks have moved on this issue. But they haven't moved, Taoiseach. They haven't moved at all with any conviction in relation to the standard variable mortgage rates. And Taoiseach, you said that if necessary, legislation would be introduced. And you're still, you see, what's going on here is the government are huffing and puffing on this, sending out hints that we'll do this and we'll do that and we'll threaten the banks with penal levies and so forth.
Question, please. Thank you.
We have put legislation before the House this week. It is constructive legislation, which would give the central bank the capacity to intervene for these 300,000 mortgage holders and also for the 46,000 mortgage holders who are at the mercy of vulture funds. I want to ask you, Taoiseach, will you accept our legislation and move it on from second stage to committee stage, given that your Minister last evening, Minister English, said that he agreed with the purpose of the bill and the objective of the bill?
Thank you.
Or is it the case that you've given up on the standard variable rate mortgage holders altogether?
No, I haven't given up at all on standard variable mortgage interest rates. I stand by the point of view that I expressed earlier on, that from any moral point of view here, where banks are able to borrow at much lower rates now that they have been restructured, and restructured in the interest of the people, not for the bank's facilities, that they should bear that in mind in terms of the lending rate that they allow for their customers. It's not true to say that banks haven't moved at all. There has been some movement from the banks. You're well aware that the Minister did meet with all of the banks. They were to respond by the 1st of July. Some have made some movement about having fixed rates of interest. Others have made some moves about cash back for customers, and there had been a reduction in interest rates, admittedly by a small amount in respect of some others, and there have been some new products and new facilities made available. But it doesn't deal with the difficulty that hard-pressed families have every week and every month in trying to meet what are much higher interest rates here applicable to variable mortgages than apply elsewhere. What I said in respect of legislation was that legislation would be introduced if the central bank required it. If the central bank requested legislation to be able to deal with this, then the government would respond to that. The central bank have said that they don't require legislation of this nature. Now, the position, Deputy Martin, is that the Minister has received a report from the Governor of the Central Bank. The officials in the Department of Finance are now looking at the outcome of the meetings that the Minister had with all of the banks and their deadline of the 1st of July. and there will be a follow-up meeting with all of the banks prior to the budget in October. I've already said to you that the option remains for the Minister for Finance, in the absence of any real movement from the banks, to take further action in the budget in October, and he's already put that on the public record. So far from removing ourselves from the 300,000 people who are paying excessive variable mortgage interest rates, the pressure is still on here, Deputy.
Sorry, the pressure is not on, because the Minister Noonan said it yesterday. The banks have moved. People should shop around, switch around, he said. The pressure's off. And you leaked the EU, or someone leaked the EU Commission report yesterday to coincide with the Fianna Fáil private members' motion, saying the EU are now saying we can't interfere and shouldn't interfere. And the central bank says we shouldn't interfere. What about consumer protection? Now, the role of the government to ensure that the central bank fulfills its obligation in relation to consumer protection. What is happening these 300,000 families, Taoiseach, is unjust. The July deadline has passed, and they have not moved in any substantive way on the standard variable rate mortgage interest issue. And no one can deny that they haven't. And your own minister last evening, Minister English, said, and again talks about the option of legislation is still open. You're saying this morning it's not open because the central bank has said it's not open. So the government doesn't initiate and doesn't want to initiate any legislation in this regard. Now, the bill before the House is a constructive piece of legislation. And despite Minister English saying that he accepted the principle of it, you intend to vote it down this evening. And you will continue to pretend to the thousands of families out there, oh, we mean to do something. We gave them this deadline. And you say, oh, officials are now looking at the outcome of meetings. In the name of God, Taoiseach, who are you trying to cod?
Thank you.
With this spin doctoring that's been going on for months and months and years on this issue. And no action in relation to it. Nothing. And it's about time you put flesh on the bone of the spin, Taoiseach, and intervene. There is legislation there before you this evening, and I ask you to allow that legislation to be approved.
Taoiseach.
Well, first of all, you make a claim here that I leaked the European Commission report. No, you said you leaked the report. And you said quickly, or someone did. Well, I want you to. Of course, I know you don't mean that. I know you don't mean that. But you put it on the record again, and I reject that, Deputy Martin. Also, you said that the central bank. You said that the central bank says that it's not open in respect of introducing legislation to deal with this. I've already said to you this morning. The government have repeatedly said to the central bank, if you want legislative powers to deal with the setting of interest rates for variable mortgages or in the mortgage market, the government will introduce such legislation. The central bank, which is independent, has said it does not need this legislation and it does not require it. But of course, you've never respected independence before or now when you're introducing legislation with Deputy McGrath, who's a decent, determined politician, is what he said this morning, and he puts legislation in here in private members' bill. Perfectly entitled to do that. The central bank have told the government they do not want legislation of this nature. The government have repeatedly said, we will introduce legislation if you request it. And you said then that the banks have not moved. The first thing I said was that the banks have not moved. Then you clarified that by saying the banks have not moved in any substantial way. Believe me, Deputy Martin, the government are very interested, and why not, in 300,000 families who are paying excessive variable mortgage interest rates. The government have restructured these banks not in the interest of the banks and their directors, but in the interest of consumers, and that cost a lot of money, as you're well aware. The second thing is the minister's met all of the banks. He's received a report from the Governor of the Central Bank. His officials are now looking at the outcome of what the banks said they would do, and the Minister will meet with them all again early September in advance of the budget in October.
Thank you.
I hope, Deputy Martin, that sets out the process and the timeline, and the end result is that the Minister has the options open to him to take further action in the budget in October of this year if the banks don't move substantially in the meantime.
Deputy Adams, thank you.
when I know, Concordia, who the Taoiseach thinks runs the state. It's the central bank. It's not the government. 300,000 households on variable mortgage rates paying 2% more than the average Eurozone borrower. Now, you've moaned about this, you've groaned about it, but you've done nothing about it. Last month, Sinn Féin brought forward the Central Bank Mortgage Interest Rates Bill 2015. This would have given the Central Bank the power to cap mortgage interest rates at banks that have been bailed out by public money. Your government voted this down. So you actually have done something about it. You've favoured the banks again against the interests of those struggling householders. And you've disguised this compliance with your usual bluster and ramesh. Last week you said that 300,000 households paying variable mortgage rates above the rates at which the banks are borrowing is not a morally justifiable position. And that was before the draft EU Commission staff report acknowledged that interest rates here are high, while at the same time recommending a hands-on approach to the banks. And therein, Taoiseach, lies the reason for your refusal to act on this morally unjustifiable position. You always do what the elites tell you to do. Will you stand up for the rights of Irish citizens? No. Will you stand up against the big boys in Brussels? No. So here's a wee test for you. Cut out the bluster, cut out the convoluted, boring narrative, cut out the excuses, reject the morally unjustifiable recommendations of the EU Commission. Give the central bank the power to cap mortgage rates at banks that have been bailed out with public monies. And Taoiseach, stand up for Irish mortgage holders.
Taoiseach.
Yeah, I will stand up for Irish mortgage holders. See, the problem on the far side is that between the two of you, you don't have a decent policy among you, so you have to revert then. You have to revert then to try to score points, off each other. Instead of putting forward your views on the economy and where it can lead to. And you, Deputy Adams, you're the person who set out to wreck the Irish economy with your prolificacy in the way that you put forward your propositions. Pay for nothing, have everything for nothing, and all will be well. All will be well. I'm very glad, Deputy, that after your engagement with the Greek Prime Minister, and I'm very happy to hear his comments last night in Brussels, they've now formally applied for assistance in respect of a new programme. This is the right thing to do given the circumstances that affect the ordinary people in Greece. And nobody in this country wants to go down that road, but that seems to be where you'd like to take us. Now, you mentioned, do what the elite tell you what to do. That's what you said. So tell me, Deputy Adams, about the Magdalens. Tell me about the institutional sexual abuse and what we've done here as a government to try to help the victims of a scandal that's gone on for so long. Tell me about the government making one of the first decisions that the Minister for Finance made was to reverse the cut in the minimum wage from the people who had it taken away from them by the previous administration. Tell me about the fact that the government were able to reduce somewhat the PRSI on the lower levels and not increase income tax in 12, 13 or 14 and make a commitment to have 500,000 people removed from liability for USC in the October budget. Is that reneging upon the people who are most affected by economic difficulties caused by this outfit over here? Is that reneging? Is that kowtowing to your so-called elite? Because as far as I'm concerned, this government will stand up for all our people. And the priority that we've given is for those who are most vulnerable, who are most affected by the economic circumstances. And we will continue to prove that, Deputy Adams. And when the time comes and the people make their choice, as they will do, I believe that they will see the sense of having a government that brings progress, economic stability, jobs and opportunity, instead of living in some kind of utopian land which would wreck this country and with your kind of philosophy has caused untold damage to 11 million people in Greece at the moment.
Sorry, hold a second, Deputy Adams. Would you cut out the chorus, please? You're not impressing anybody. The people at home aren't impressed either, I can assure you. I'm sure the people in the gallery aren't impressed either. Would you allow somebody to speak? We live in a democracy. Deputy Adams, just stay quiet for 1 minute. That's all you have. 1 minute, Deputy Adams.
Well, Taoiseach, Cloncordia, Taoiseach avoided the one question I put to him, which was give the central bank the power to cap mortgage interest rates at banks that have been bailed out with public money. He ignored that. He took us through his usual Ramesh and Bolskaracht. Now, the fact is there are 300,000 households on variable mortgage interest, and they are being ripped off by the banks, and your government has stood by while the problem has escalated. And you do act in the interest of the elites. And your response to every issue that's of importance to ordinary citizens is that you're powerless to take action. Yet you reward, just last week, you reward former Taoiseach and ministers with big hikes in their pensions while you slash payments to lone parent families. Whose side are you on? I know what side Sinn Féin is on. We're on the side of citizens. You ran through laws to take money.
Please, thank you.
You ran through laws to take money from families who can least afford it, while former Irish Nationwide Chief Michael Fingleton still holds on to the 1 million of a bonus he promised to return to taxpayers.
Thank you.
There's no special legislation to deal with that, Taoiseach. Tá glia on the Dini Sever, agus Gliala, the Suriname Ella. And the bottom line, Taoiseach, is neither you nor your finance minister have the backbone to stand up to the banks and to take action to end the punitive, morally unjustifiable interest rates being inflicted on struggling households.
Thank you.
Tommy Cricknahan, Taoiseach, isn't it the case that your government has a consistent record of legislating in the interests of the wealthy and against the interests of everyone else? And is this the real reason why you refuse to take action against the banks and to stand up for mortgage holders? And please, Taoiseach, please, because I'm an optimist, give us an answer to the question. Will you give the central bank the power to cap these mortgage interest rates at banks that have been bailed out?
Thank you.
Please, Taoiseach, just say yes or no.
Taoiseach.
The answer to your question is yes, on one condition. They have to request it.
Sorry.
Minister for Finance has made it clear on more than one occasion in writing to the central bank, if a request comes from the central bank to legislate in this regard, the government have responded that they will do so. And that's because, Deputy, the central bank are independent in the way they do their business. We've already made it clear if they require legislation, it will be made available to them. So it's ask and you shall receive. Now, you mentioned about speaking about delivering only for the elite. That's what you consistently come with this nonsense that the government forget about the ordinary citizens in our country who walk into the offices and the constituency clinics of every deputy on this side of the House as they do in respect of everybody else. And that's why, unlike you, the focus of government has been to create opportunity and jobs so that people can work, can earn money, can have a career, can contribute to their locality, their community and their lives. And that's why the measure of success is measurable in 104,000 new jobs created since late 2011. It's not enough, but 40,000 more this year, 40,000 next year, 40,000 in 2017 and 2018 will eliminate anybody's opportunity not to have a job if they want to work here. So everybody who wants to work will have the opportunity to do so.
Thank you.
And a well-managed economy, as you well know, Deputy, means that you don't have to You can get away from all of the difficult decisions that our people made in the last number of years, and where we're now through that gap in a very different position than we were, with unemployment falling, interest rates below 2%, opportunities for investment, for exports stronger than ever before, consumer sentiment the strongest in almost 10 years. It's not where we want to be yet, Deputy, but it's very much in the right direction. And your sort of nonsense of going around saying don't pay for property tax, don't pay for water charges, don't pay for health. Do you believe, Deputy Adams, do you believe that people think that they live on fresh air? This country has never been afraid to accept a challenge, and we're measuring up to this one.
Mind your own business.
Very much in the right
chair
direction.
For the time being. Just step back. Deputy Fleming. Who are you trying to impress? Who are you trying to impress? Deputy Fleming, you're not going to take me on, I can tell you. Deputy Fleming, I'm protecting Deputy Adams when he asks this question, not you lot shouting and roaring, and we can't hear his question, we can't hear the answer. That's all I'm interested in. Deputy Fleming, thank you.
The recent report by the organisation, which is called Alone, to set up with the slogan, helping older people in need, it asked the question, why are we forcing older people out of their homes? And the statistics they provide show that more than 1/3 of older people in long-term nursing homes, for instance, have low to medium dependency needs, meaning they could live at home if provided with adequate and proper home care. The state now has a far higher proportion of its elderly population living in long-term nursing homes than the European average, and a large majority are there simply because of the inadequacy of home care services and the supports that the state offers. We are all in favour of older people living at home within their communities as they age, and doing so for as long as possible. But negative developments for instance, in a cut to home care packages, in cuts to housing grants for the disabled and the elderly. Since 2009, the statistics is that we have over 1.75 million hours in the home health service have been cut to this vital and crucial service. And this has a devastating effect, naturally, on the home care, and also has accelerated the move forward where many people prematurely are entering into long-term residential care. And while the programme for government, the HSE service plan and the national positive strategy all offer nominal support for the general idea of older people aging at home, nevertheless, the financial means to achieve this simply have not been put forward and have not been provided for the most part. But there is a lot of lip service, to say the least, and grand aspirations that have fallen far short of the targets.
Question, please. Thank you.
And I would just ask the question of the Taoiseach. Will you, Taoiseach, and your government revisit and address the shortfalls in the forthcoming budget and set out a strategy to go forward into the next 5 years in this very important issue?
Thanks, Deputy Fleming. You're aware that discussions around the budget are a matter between the Ministers for Finance and Public Expenditure and Reform, and all of that will take place, including a sort of a public engagement with the different sectors over the next period. Take your point. You do raise what is a very serious matter, and it affects families all over the country. Dementia doesn't distinguish between borders or geographical boundaries. I'm informed that in 2011 there were 47,000 people suffering from dementia in the country here, but that by 2021 that's expected to rise to 68,000, which is over a 42% increase, which speaks for itself of the scale of the challenge here. I think it's important to recognise that government have recognised this, Deputy Fleming, and Minister Lynch, Minister Cathy Lynch and Minister Varadkar, and previous to that Minister Riley, had put in place the process by which the National Dementia Strategy has actually now been developed, agreed and published. And that's its main functions and focus really are to have timely access and diagnosis, support nationally and locally, and training and support for families and healthcare workers. And it is a priority of government, Deputy Fleming, that people should be able to stay in their own homes for as long as that is medically and physically possible. There is a whole series of, there are a whole range of initiatives introduced by the HSE to ensure that older people have timely, appropriate care and treatment at the lowest level of complexity and as close to home as possible. And isn't that what people always want, or would always wish, or always desire? And in its service plan for 2015, the Health Service Executive has indicated its intention to progress the realignment of services to provide home care services and community care services in order to maximise the opportunity for older people to stay in their own homes for as long as possible. There are 10.3 million hours of time and of home help service supporting 50,000 people at the moment. And there are 13,800 people who are now in receipt of home care packages at any one time, and this includes an additional 600 people who are supported under the Delayed Discharges Initiative. There are 190 people in receipt of intensive home care packages at any one time, and these were introduced in the first period in 2014 for people who have more complex individual needs. I'd also say that there's now a facility available which is a national tool for assessment of the needs of people. Instead of having varying standards that apply in different parts of the country, there's now an assessment available so that it can be equated across the country. In 2015, there are 993 million allocated for the nursing home support scheme, which is obviously so important for people. But take your point, but I'm quite sure, Deputy Fleming, if you've read the National Dementia Strategy, it has been welcomed. It's a very comprehensive and thorough analysis, not just of the scale of the challenge, rising up to, as I said, 70,000 people by 2021, but now the opportunity with a rising economy to hopefully be able to deal more comprehensively with this in the time ahead. The point you raise about the budget will obviously be taken into account.
Deputy Fleming.
Taoiseach, we have a dramatically ageing population, and all the current trends and statistics point towards this, and the government needs to take this into account and to plan accordingly into the future. It needs to look at options of supportive housing and extra care nursing that allows people to live in the community with the additional supports. And by 2026, it is envisaged that 16% of the population will be over 65 years of age. The current make-up of 11% of the population and the current model of prioritising nursing home care is not sustainable going into the future and going forward. And while nursing home care is the only option for many high dependency patients, and sufficient funds, for instance, in the fair deal system, it needs to be set aside in the budget, and this is a priority item as well. Also, sufficient funding needs to be there for the additional support beds that are out there in our, for respite, for instance, and for in acute hospital needs. And they're needed to solve the current overcrowding in these hospitals. But these matters certainly can be addressed in the short term. And but certainly we're faced again with the current demographics and the increase in the older population. And as you've mentioned, Taoiseach, quite rightly so, the huge problem that's going to be posed for this government and for all future governments. For instance, with the dementia increase from about 47,000 into 68,000 in 2020. And it is envisaged that there will be, and predicted, you'll have a 240% increase coming up into the years 2040, for instance, from these figures. And we're faced with a tsunami and an avalanche coming down the road. And I think, Taoiseach, it is certainly action needs to be taken, and it's a medium to long-term plan, really. And I think the government should set out there. As of now, we need a strategy a good collective government. There are several ministers, ministerial departments involved in this. And I would ask Count Call that the Taoiseach would set out, as from this budget coming over the next number of years, set out the strategy to be faced with what's coming.
Well, I would say to you that the National Dementia Strategy, which is central to the issue that you raised, has been a great deal of work has been done. It's been launched and published, and I believe genuinely that it's a comprehensive analysis of the scale of the challenge, and we can project, reasonably accurately the figures for the next number of years, which spell out the scale of the challenge that we're going to have to meet. And I've given you some of the figures where government have now applied finance so that people can remain at home for as long as possible, the method of assessment which would be more accurate for the particular needs of people in different parts of the country. But I also say to you, Deputy Fleming, there's a big change of culture in the country in the sense of dealing now with obesity, dealing with the question of Healthy Ireland, dealing with the issues arising from the thousands of deaths that happen each year because of tobacco, the questions surrounding alcohol and its abuse, and so on. And obviously, you'll notice yourself the new activity levels of citizens. We appreciate people with modern medicine and healthier lifestyles can live for longer. So in that sense, the change of attitude towards a healthier Ireland and therefore a healthier population is important in the longer term for people to live longer. I noticed the spectacular achievement of an octogenarian the other day in climbing Kilimanjaro, which is an extraordinary feat. And indeed in your own county last weekend is an example of the interest that people have in achieving personal goals in an extraordinary cycle event for charity, which has a double impact. So that's all part of the strategy of having people more involved, more engaged, a healthier Ireland. In respect of dementia, the point you raise, the strategy is in place. It's now a question of being able to meet the challenges that strategy outlines. Thank you for your question.
That completes the leaders' questions for today. We now move on to the order of business.